Yo, I'm back with another video. It's your boy Mario Shea Freddy G. I'm going to talk about metaphysics. Like, comment, subscribe. Metaphysics, the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space. Abstract theory with no basis in reality. The origin of metaphysics, representing the Latin word metaphysia, based on the Greek taumatia, something like that. It means the things after the fixes, referring to the sequence of Aristotle works. The title that came to devote the branch of study treat in the books, interpreted as meaning the science of things transcending what is physical or natural. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that examines the fundamental of nature reality, including the relationship between mind and matter, between substance and absolute, and between potentially and actually. The word metaphysics comes from two Greek words that together literally means after or behind or among the study of the natural. It has been suggested that the term might have been coined by a first century CE editor who assembled various small selection of Austral works into the Trinity we now know by the name metaphysics, after the physics. Metaphysics, it can mean a division of philosophy that is concerned with the fundamental nature or reality of being that includes ontology, cosmology, often eschatology, a study what is outside object experience. Just as physics deals with the laws that govern the physical world, such as those of gravity and the properties of waves, metaphysics describe what is beyond physics, the nature or origin of reality itself. The immortal soul, in the existence of a supreme being. Opinions about these metaphysical topics vary widely, since what being discussed can't be absorbed or measured, even truly known to exist. So metaphysical questions are still as far as from a final answer as they were Plato or Aristotle were asking. What is metaphysics? it compass everything that exists as well as the nature of existence itself. It says whether the world is real or merely a illusion. It is a fundamental view of the world around us.
What is metaphysics? Metaphysics is traditionally defined as that branch of philosophy which deals with the most general and abstract questions, such as those pertaining to the nature of existence, the categories of space and time, the existence of God, or the immortality of the human soul. Metaphysics, therefore, seeks to provide a comprehensive account of the world that is proof against the uncertainties of experience. The term metaphysics is supposedly derived from the Greek words ta meta ta physica, which means the work after the physics, or, in other words, the treatise by Aristotle that was catalogued after his physics in some lost library. As is well known, Aristotle's Metaphysics, which he himself called First Philosophy, is one of the earliest treatises on the subject and has had immense influence on the entire history of Western philosophy. It might also be said to come after the physics, in that it offers a systematic account of the categories employed by physics, defined as the study of physis, or nature. In that sense, metaphysics is to physics, as metalanguage is to language. At the heart of the book lie three questions. 1. What is existence, and what sorts of things exist in the world? 2. How can things continue to exist, and yet undergo the change we see about us in the natural world? And 3. How can this world be understood? Although it was long considered to be the most noble branch of philosophy, metaphysics has come under attack from a variety of quarters in the 20th century, and its very existence has been called into question. On the one hand, developments in the natural sciences mean that questions pertaining to space and time are now a matter for mathematicians and theoretical physicists, rather than speculative philosophers. The developments within philosophy itself, and especially the so-called linguistic turn, mean, on the other hand, that the traditional concerns of metaphysics are often viewed as problems that arise from the misuse of language. For the logical positivists of the Vienna Circle, metaphysics is viewed as a derogatory term to be applied to speculative or unverifiable statements, such as, God exists. Indeed, for many of the theorists associated with analytic philosophy and ordinary language philosophy, metaphysical problems are simply a product of the ambiguities of language. For the philosophers associated with these traditions, the task of philosophy is, therefore, to arrive at a better understanding of concepts through a better understanding of language that will rid philosophy of metaphysical pseudo-problems. Jacques Derrida, and the practitioners of deconstruction, tend to use the term metaphysics, or Western metaphysics, as a synonym for philosophy itself, and hold that it is the most dangerous manifestation of logocentrism.
In this lecture, we're going to look at Martin Heidegger's short essay, What is Metaphysics? It's probably one of the better introductions, I think, to some of the key themes of Heidegger's work, particularly his early work, but also his work as a whole. And this was a lecture that he gives early on in his career, but you can see some of the main themes already emerging and already, integrated very well in this. And so he's asking this fundamental question, what is metaphysics? And you notice I put a bunch of other questions here as well that he's going to travel through, and then I put several quotations here. So before we actually go into the lecture, let's talk about these. To ask the question, what is metaphysics, is to ask the question, what is being, and what are beings? And metaphysics is a type of inquiry that traditionally in philosophy goes beyond other types of inquiry. In Aristotle's case, beyond the physics, beyond the phenomenal apparent world to ask about the reality of things. Heidegger says that in order to think about this, and there's many other people who thought this as well, you also have to ask, what is human being? And one branch of metaphysics is what we call philosophical anthropology, or the philosophy of human nature. Heidegger is going to conceive of it in terms of Dasein, or being there, a particular type of being among beings that turns out to be human beings that has certain peculiar properties in its very essence. Then we've got this other strange thing, what is the nothing? Or what is nothing? And for Heidegger to do metaphysics is not just to ask, what are beings and such, and then what is this particular kind of being that, grasps other beings. It's also to ask about what is nothing, what is the non-being, what is beyond or underneath, or in some ways, the negation of being. And we'll talk about why negation by itself doesn't actually work. And here's the question that he actually starts with, and this is pretty typical Heidegger. He's going to traipse all over the place in discussing these things, and in very, illuminating ways, but he's going to start with a question that he'll answer, along the way, fairly easily, revealing greater and deeper questions. So what is science? And then he's going to reframe it as what is the ground? What is the essence? Or what is allowing science to be science? So he's beginning with this question, okay, what is science? Metaphysics is a type of science. If we understand science, not in terms just of the natural sciences or the social sciences, the way that we often do in the English-speaking world, but in the sense of a rigorous study of some sort. A Wissenschaft, a rigorous study that is conducted according to its own norms, that attempts to be systematic, that attempts to get to the bottom of things. That's what a science is. So now you notice I also put these quotes here, and I've got three of them, and you might say, well, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end. So he starts off with things that seem, easy enough to get our heads around. Every metaphysical problem always encompasses the whole range of metaphysical problems, right? So anytime that we're going to do metaphysics, that we're going to touch on metaphysical topics like what is reality versus appearance, or what is the nature of freedom, or is the will in fact free, or does determinism rule, or what kinds of beings are there? We're not just trying to settle that particular question, according to Heidegger, and according to many other philosophers as well, Hegel, Nietzsche, going all the way back to people like Aristotle. These are not dealt with in complete isolation from each other. Well, that's something that's not too hard to grasp. The nothing itself annihilates. Now we're in the realm, right in the heart of what is metaphysics, and you might say, well, what does that mean? And actually, this is one of the phrases that was used by Heidegger's critics in order to suggest that maybe Heidegger's philosophy itself was just a bunch of nonsense. As a matter of fact, the logical positivist said this is sort of the prime example of nonsense. Well, it's going to have a meaning in Heidegger, but we have to dig and we have to work our way through to actually get to that meaning. And then finally, at the very end, not the very last sentence, but close to the end, human existence can relate to beings only if it holds itself out into the nothing. This going beyond is metaphysics itself. So it tells us what metaphysics actually is, and that we're actually doing metaphysics whether we realize it or not. But it's framing it in such a way that we don't at first understand it. human existence can relate to beings only if it holds itself out into the nothing. So what does that mean, holding itself out into the nothing? Find a cliff and just sort of hang out into, nothingness? Well, that's not actually nothingness, and we'll talk about why. So that frames our inquiry, and we're going to move through this pretty quickly. I'm not going to be able to touch on every single important point in this, because we're trying to get this done within, a certain time frame. I should mention that I'm using the Krull translation. There's other translations available of this. Heidegger is somebody who's notoriously difficult to translate because he does a lot of playing around with language, but I think this is an adequate way of approaching it. So he says, what is metaphysics? The question awakens expectations of a discussion about metaphysics. This will forego. So Heidegger's already switching the deck at the beginning. Instead, we're going to take a particular metaphysical question. Why? Well, because any place that we approach metaphysics, any door we go in, we're going to be dealing with the rest of metaphysics. So we're going to start with this. What is science? He says, metaphysical inquiry must be posed as a whole and from the essential position of the existence that questions. We are questioning, so human beings are questioning here and now for ourselves, our existence, what determinate existence in the community of researchers, teachers, and students. So what is science is a good question to ask in that case. What happens to us, essentially, in the grounds of our existence when science becomes our passion, becomes the thing that's motivating us? So he starts off with some general reflections about what we can call scientific fields. And he says the scientific fields are quite diverse. The ways they treat their objects of inquiry differ fundamentally. And if you think about, the university, not only as it is now, but also as it was in his time, there's a lack of unity to the different subjects that are studied. By the time that we get to our time, there's a lot of attempts to try to reintroduce some sort of integration or core to it, but quite often that's unsuccessful. And each of the disciplines tends to have its own norms, which don't, coincide too well, and sometimes don't even understand the norms of other disciplines. They reject them as being not as scientific or not as rigorous as their own. And so, there's a lot of, you might say it's almost like a little babble going on within every university. So he says, when we look at the sciences themselves, from their point of view, no field takes precedence over another, neither nature over history, nor vice versa. Each of them has their own type of rigor, their own type of perhaps exactness or not. And he says, according to the idea behind them, in the sciences we approach what's essential in things. So that's key. It's not just having a method. It's not just being rigorous in some sense of the term. It's that there's a pretense to actually getting at the things as they really are. So if you're a sociologist, you believe that there actually is stuff out there like social facts or society or group dynamics that you're analyzing. And if you don't, well then you're really not going to do much sociology, or you're going to be a complete cynic. If you're a psychology, you've got to believe that you're actually investigating something having to do with the human mind, or you're not doing psychology after a certain point. If you're a physicist, you've got to believe that what you're doing actually has something to do with the physical world as we observe it. If you're a historian, whatever school you may belong to, whether you're a Marxist or a Laissez-aller historian, or pick whatever you want, you actually have to think there actually is something like history out there, maybe multiple histories, whatever you like, but there has to be something out there that you're actually trying to understand. So, how is science different from other things? He says, science is exceptional in that, in a way peculiar to it, it gives the matter itself explicitly and solely the first and last word. In such impartiality of inquiring, determining, and grounding, a peculiarly delineated submission to beings themselves obtains in order that they may reveal themselves. This is kind of idealized on Heidegger's part. Not everybody who's doing science actually does this, but this is part of it. That, again, if you want to be a sociologist, you can't just sort of make it up as you go along or pick whatever theory you happen to like because, that makes you feel good. You actually have to, observe some phenomena and see whether the theory can actually coincide with those phenomena well enough that without too much fudging, you can make some sense out of it. This is what he calls a submission to beings themselves. So, in science, he talks about a special relation that's taking place there. And he talks about this sort of trinity. He says, man, one being among others, pursues science. In this pursuit, nothing less transpires than the eruption by one being, called man, onto the whole of beings. We're the investigators. We're a type of being, and we're turning to the rest of being, and we're actually penetrating into it and making it become something for ourselves, for our consciousness, so that we can actually come to know it. And he says, this eruption that breaks open in its way helps beings above all to themselves. So, if we want to take just physical sciences, for example, or biology, by studying the things, we're studying beings that are there out in the world, and by our learning about them, we are helping those beings be more than they previously were. We're helping them unfold some of themselves. In a way, there's a bit of idealism here. Now, I want to go on further from this and not dwell on that. Heidegger says, this trinity, relation to the world, attitude and eruption, in its radical unity, brings a luminous simplicity and aptness of Dasein to scientific existence. If we are to take explicit possession of the Dasein illuminated in this way for ourselves, and here's where he makes a critical turning, we must say, he says three things, that to which the relation to the world refers are beings themselves and nothing besides. That from which every attitude takes its guidance are beings themselves and nothing besides. That which the scientific confrontation in the eruption occurs are beings themselves and beyond that nothing. So we have, in each of these, beings themselves and nothing else. Here's where the critical turn takes place. Science looks at the beings themselves, and it doesn't look at that nothing. Heidegger is going to look at that nothing. So he says, what is remarkable is that the scientific man doesn't look at the beyond that nothing. What about this nothing? Is it an accident that we talk this way so automatically? Is this just a function of our language? Could we have a language in which there isn't any such thing like that? Or is there something essential going on there? He says, what trouble do we take concerning this nothing? The nothing is rejected precisely by science, given up as a nullity. But when we give up the nothing in such a way, do we not concede it? There's something about the very concept of nothing that becomes tricky in ways that don't apply to beings.